Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the most important part of mixing. It doesn't matter whether you're the biggest mixer in the world or you're just starting out. This is something that has to be done every time. Mix preparation. So before we get started, not all sessions are created equal. The one we're about to work on here is labeled very effectively. The kicks are called kicks, the snares are called snares, the acoustic guitars are called acoustic guitars. One of the first things you might find you're doing, quite frankly, once you've listened down to the song and just kind of got a feel for it, is you might find you don't know where the acoustic guitar is. You've got to search through. And then when you find it, you've got to label it. I can't tell you how many sessions I've been given over the years where it's called Audio 1, Audio 2, Audio 3, Audio 4. There's even sessions where AC you'd think was acoustic guitar. It might not be the acoustic guitar, it might be the name of the player, whose name is Anthony Collins or something like that. You get what I'm saying? You've got to listen down to things. This is the perfect time in a mix situation to listen in solo and clean everything up. Label things as you go. So take that time. We're going to talk about labeling, obviously, but also grouping things together. Let's get stuck in. Even the biggest mixers in the world go through this. Now, many of them, of course, are very, very blessed to have an assistant. Not all of them. There's actually a few friends of mine that are very successful that do everything on their own. And they like it. They like to organize things on their own. But most big mixers, especially ones that still mix using consoles, will have an assistant go through and prepare everything to get ready for mixing. So we're going to talk about that. But first, please, if you haven't already, go to Produce Like a Pro, sign up for the email list, and you'll get a whole bunch of free goodies. Also, of course, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you'll be notified when we have a new video up. So let's talk about all of the things that we need to do to prepare. Now, I have looked at a couple of videos on this subject, and of course, I've been mixing now for many years. Quite a long time. What I realize is that a lot of the stuff is covered, but not in the actual detail that makes sense to me. First of all, if you're doing this on your own, it's a different process from when you have somebody assisting. Now, you might say, why would that be? Well, as just a mixer only, where somebody else is assisting me, it's my job to listen to the music. My assistant will set up the tracks. Eric sets up the tracks through the console. He does cleanup. He gets things all ready to go. If there needs to be any kind of editing done to the tracks, he will get it done. He's very aware of how I want things to be set up. So my only interaction with the song would be to listen to the rough mix or a previous final mix from somebody else, and then make decisions based on that. If I'm doing this on my own, I am going to listen to the track first. So number one, listen to the song. Now, you might say, why? You're preparing for a mix. Well, I want to listen to the track because I want to hear if there's any audible issues that really strike me first. So number one, just listen to the song you're about to mix. So here we have a song that we recorded about 7 or 8 months ago in Germany at Hansa Studios. And this is a rough mix from the studio, from the SSL there. And it doesn't have any moves or anything on it, but I haven't listened to it in absolutely ages, so it's going to be refreshing. So number one, I'm going to listen to the song.
I wanna go everywhere, so many things to cross off our list. I wanna go everywhere, everywhere. I wanna go everywhere, so many things to cross off our list. I wanna go everywhere, everywhere. Have you ever tried to take a picture of the ocean? You know it's
So this song has live drums in it. It has some programming stuff. I hear keys. I hear loops. If this was a song I hadn't worked on at all, I would be, listening all the way down, listening for things, just get myself into the song a little bit. It's something I do obviously at the mix process, is get into the song, but I need to hear it just to understand what all these tracks are going to be, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to make decisions on the tracks. So here at the top, you can see there's some electronic elements. We can just solo these and listen to them. Here's the live drum kit elements. There's also some samples and stuff in here. So the most important thing for me in my DAW, which is Pro Tools, but whatever your DAW is to create groups and organize my tracks. So as you can see, I've got all the kick drums here at the top. Now I'm going to, first of all, just get the live kick drum elements and group those. And that will give me these three elements of live kick drum. Now, the same thing I'll do on the snare. There's a lot of different snare mics here. So what I'd be doing now is listening in solo. So I'm going to listen to this track labeled Snare Top SM57. All the way down here, I'm going to pull it up and organize it. Close to it is the snare bottom. So now I've got the snare top and snare bottom together. And then there's a mic here called the Verst mic, which is that mic, for those of you who don't know, that's sort of pointed inside of the drum kit. But if I didn't mix this song, I might not know that, so I'm going to give it a listen. So to me, it's like a mid-rangey, I don't get the low end of the kick, kind of mono drum sound, I suppose I would describe that as. Probably won't put that into the snare group. So I'm just going to have the snare top and snare bottom, and I'm going to group those together. So I'm organizing elements of the drum kit. So far I've got the live kick and I've got the live snare. This Verst mic here, I'm probably just going to mute for the time being, because if somebody gives you a mic like that of a drum kit and you're not quite sure its purpose, it's okay. When I receive mics like that, I think of them as maybe mono room mics. Maybe I'll trash it out with some compression and see what energy I can get out of it. Maybe I'll stick a reverb on it and use it as a mono room mic and put it down the center. Who knows? But at the moment, I'm just going to move on. So the next mic I see here is called Floor Cymbal. Now, I know this was a cymbal on the floor that's mic'd, but you're going to have to listen to it and go, what is this mic? So somebody gave me a mic that sounded like that, and I didn't know what Floor Sim M260 means. I'm just going to assume it's another mono room mic. So I'll probably put the Verst mic and that one together and come back to it in a second. But to me, that's probably two mono room mics. Again, I'm just going to mute it, not worry about it at the moment. Then I've got some tom mics. It looks like there's a tom top and a tom bottom. So that's obviously a floor tom. Then there's a high top and high bottom. Now I know, because we recorded this on an SSL, that we had an issue on that SSL busing the two tracks together. So we actually printed them independently. But I might not realize that, being handed those. And so what I would do, I'm going to listen to these now. You know, this is a voyage of discovery. So you're going, what are these mics? So let's take the toms and do groups. So I'm going to do floor tom, and I'm going to group these two for the rack tom. You could do an overall toms group as well, but I'm not going to get to that quite yet. Now there is a floor sample, so I can put that underneath. There is also a rack tom sample. I'll put that underneath for organization. Now, there's a double miking on the hi-hat, and they have been printed separately too. But I know that because I recorded it. You would have to listen to this and go, there's no hat in that place. Go and have a check it out. Cymbals there. Still cymbals. So we just went through the whole song, and the only place I heard hi-hat was here. And here. Interesting. It's why you listen to the tracks. I mean, that's the only place that the drummer is playing hi-hat. And the drummer is also the singer, Charlie Clouser. And then this other mic, which is a 452, a hi-hat as well. So I've got two hi-hat mics. I can group those together. Now I have a pair of hi-hats. Next up are what looks like to me 3 overhead mics. Now they're labeled floor, ride, and hat. That's showing their placement. So I would assume that the floor tom, it says mono. Let's have a listen to that. I know this session, so we did a lot of mics on this, and that mic was actually part of a Glyn Johns miking technique if you wanted to go for 3 mics. But once again, if I don't know that, I'm thinking to myself, what's the information I know? What am I hearing? What I'm hearing there is a microphone that sounds like it's a mono mic of the kit. Could be close to the floor tom. It's given me some clue in the Sonics event. It's given me some clue in the name. But I'm probably, quite frankly, going to mute that. I don't know what it is. I do know what it is, but you wouldn't know what it was. So now I've got overhead ride and overhead hat. That to me means left and right. It means whatever way you want to pan the drum. So if you decide to do it from a drummer's perspective, you would pan your overheads over to the hi-hat side on the left, if you wanted a drummer's perspective. But of course, from my perspective, I always do audience. So that means I would pan that ride opposite. So the hi-hat one at the bottom here would actually go to the far right for me, because I'm doing audience perspective, and then far left on the right. We can group those two together, and we'll call them, you guessed it, overheads. So here I've got a cymbal sample. We'll just leave that near the overheads. Absolutely fine. Then below this, I've got left and right rooms. Again, I don't know what that means. The thing is it left from the audience perspective or is it left from the drummer's perspective? Let's have a listen. Now, to me, it seems like this one labeled left here is hearing more of the floor side. So I'm going to assume, if I'm doing audience perspective, that is the left-hand side because it's more dominated by the floor. So audience perspective, pan to the left. So let's group those two together. And then below that is a U67 called room. So I'm going to assume a mono U67. Obviously crushed. Again, we could put that over our other mono room mics, or we could drag those down. So what I'm doing now is I'm grouping those monos together. To be honest, I find this more interesting than the other two monos I heard. It's got great energy. It's a good sounding mic. Last but no means least, presumably, is a mic called a marble. That's obviously some kind of crushed mic in a room, presumably where there was some marble, which it was. But, you know, I listened to it. I heard it was a room mic. It was a long way away from it. Again, so we've got these 4 mics down here, which are all mono rooms. I'm not going to group them together because I'm probably going to treat them very differently. But there they all are. So now between here and right up the top is all the drum mics. We've got these 3 kick samples here, which we could group together now, and they will remain under the kick. Then we've got 3 snare samples here. Now there's also a snare sample here, which I know and you wouldn't, but I know is actually a sample of the live snare. So it should be pretty phase accurate with the real snare. So I'm going to put that there, but I'm not going to include it with the other samples. Because if I listen to it, it's very close in pitch to the original because it is actually the original. But it's a combination of the top and the bottom snare together. With this session, there's also 3 samples here called snare grace notes. So what these are those little sort of movements that the drummer Charlie's doing. She's playing them. She's like, she's doing these sort of little movements. You can call it grace note samples. You can call it ghosts. Other people call them ghost notes. So lots of stuff going on with this, and this isn't unusual. You may get sessions with one snare drum mic, one only, snare top, and then you've got to figure this stuff out. You might get stuff like this with multiple samples in it, and you're trying to figure out how to do it. This is the point. You're getting stuck into the song. And what I like about this process is everything I'm doing here is sort of getting me into the drums. So now I've got all the elements I've done is giving me this. Let's take our floor tom and pan it about 60% over. There's a floor sample. Let's throw that in, see what it sounds like. Now I'm going to go to my toms, and I usually pan mine about 20%. Not quite as far as a hi-hat, maybe 30%. Because I'm looking at the drum kit, I'm seeing the floor about 60% over here. I'm hearing the toms about 20 or 30%, and then maybe the hi-hat about 60% over there, and that's my drum kit. And there's also a rack sample as well. We've got our hi-hat, so we'll go about 60%. We'll go the other side of the tom. So think about it. Here's your snare drum. There's the rack tom, and there's the hi-hat. You can go 50% if you think 60 is too extreme. It's really up to you. Depends on how wide you want that drum kit to be. So I'm actually bringing it, we'll say 54%. So now the hat is panned audience perspective, which is just my choice, to the other side of the toms. Now, as you remember, there's barely any hat going on in this. It's quite possible if it's interfering with the track that I might just solo the bits I need. I might just go there and choose to mute everything except for those hits there and the other place that Charlie plays here. I'm also, because this is what I do, I'm going to just pull that volume down. Just because, it seemed a bit loud. And, it's okay to do those kind of things. It's part of the preparation is frankly, for me, when I'm the only one working on it, I'm prepping the tracks, I'm getting them the way I want them to be. Overheads are in, throwing the room mics. We'll leave all the mono stuff out except for those 2 really cool ones. And now I am going to create a group of everything. So now I'm going to call this all drums. Going to solo, so you can hear it, and this is the drums. So as you can see over here on the left, I've created a lot of groups. But the thing about those groups are, if I turn that all drums one off, I can go in and just grab individual elements easily. Now that we've got the drums organized, there's pretty important things to check. And one of those, of course, is phase. We've got to make sure everything's hitting together. Now, there's samples that have already been placed in this, and they seem pretty phase accurate. If we were to get in a little closer, you can see here where the phase is relatively accurate. Now, if you are using samples or using multiple mics, it's really tough to get things exactly the same. It just is. Now, there is this 441 Flex here, which is a Lewitt mic. And that's essentially a mono room mic as well. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to go to that group that I created, the Kick Live, and I'm going to remove that from the group. And I'm going to take that mic, which I feel is more of a mono room mic, and dump it down the bottom here with my other mono room mics. So now I've got quite a combination down here. I've got the mono overhead, I've got that mono kick room mic, and I've also got the versed microphone and the floor cymbal microphone. So I've got these 4 mono room mics down here, which could be useful. We don't know. It depends on what I want to do. But at the moment, I like the U87 crushed mic, and the Marble are giving me some really interesting drum sounds. So all of these kicks seem pretty darn good, considering talking about a combination of samples and multiple mics. It's never going to be perfect, but in this instance, it's pretty darn good. Obviously, the most important thing is to listen. Relationship's pretty darn good. As I was saying before, to get it to be exact is pretty difficult. I will say these 2 elements of the kick this one could drag back a little bit, this top one. So lots of people like to use fancy plugins. There are some great plugins. We'll sit there and realign them. I try not to realign. I personally don't use those plugins, but you can. What I will do is just grab a time aligner, which is time adjuster in Pro Tools, and just measure these areas here in samples. So if I go to samples up here, that is 49 samples, and I can put 49 samples here. Now it's delaying this kick-in mic with the FET. Amazing. It's just adding a tiny little bit more low end. It's quite noticeable. Wow. Okay, so it's nice. So subtle things like that. The snare top and snare bottom on this, the polarity, the phase would have been flipped reverse on the snare bottom because the snare mic on the bottom is facing up, the snare top is facing down. Now, I can drag the snare top back. So we measure that in samples. It's saying about 35-ish. Check in a couple other places. What is it here? 33. That's about 35. I'm going to drag the snare top back as well. Make this 35 samples, and now the snare top and bottom will have more body. Now, it's never going to be perfect, but it's a little better. The only issue now is it looks like all of the snare samples were laid into the top. So that means whatever we do on that snare top also has to be done on the snare samples. Now, you have a choice. You could pick it up and drag it back, or nudge it if you want. You could take all 4 of these, nudge that 35 samples back, which is the arrows on the bottom of your keyboard. The only thing I will say is now it looks really beautiful and will sound great with the snare top. But remember, don't be deceived by the looks. It's how it sounds. Let's have a listen. Great. Now, you don't have to nudge. You could put that time adjuster on there as well, but you see the principle. The next thing I love to do is to make sure my overheads are in phase with the snare and vice versa. So if we grab our left and right overheads and drag them up, the snare is 115 samples laid back. So let's make a decision. Let's hear how it sounds. So I'm going to bring up another time adjuster. So all of the snares are going to be the same. So I'm going to put that at 115. Now, what we could do is we could decide to bus everything together, but I don't want to do that yet. So I'm just literally going to go crazy and put this time adjuster on every single track of the snare. And we're going to listen and see if the body is increased. It's keeping the integrity of the snare. So let's turn up the overheads. Actually sounds pretty good. I'm going to throw the whole drum kit together and see if I'm getting any kind of flamming. I like it. It sounds good. So that's not for everybody. Some people do not like tugging it back. But the point is for me is I like the overheads to have a good, accurate representation of the kit. The first thing I'm going to look for in overhead mics, for instance, is whether they're in phase with each other. And they are. And again, I recorded this so I know I measured them off. So if you're looking here, you'll see that the phase is really good. It's never going to be perfect. It depends on which drum they're playing, but essentially it's pretty darn good. So there is the importance of phase relationship. The same thing has to happen on the bass guitar. So if we whip down here to the bass guitar, you're going to see there's a DI and a cab. And they're fairly accurate. Here's the DI on its own. I always find on bass guitars when you're talking about using a DI and a cab that the relationship always is a little fuzzy. There's times when it feels absolutely perfect and there's times where it doesn't. So the cab to me always is where the personality is. Got the DI. In mixing, I would go and grab an EQ on this and just use the low end only for the DI. So just a quick experiment. I'm going to see how that sounds. This might confuse you as far as setup is concerned, but I'm going to do it because I need to ascertain something. No, it's good, clean, low end. Let's draw that over onto the cab. DI. So here's one of those situations. The cab on its own, regardless of the EQ setting, sounds pretty darn good. If that was your only source, you could probably mix that to sound pretty amazing. It's got good low end. It's a little uneven. Notes are jumping out all over the place, but that's why we have compression. But it's a pretty darn good sound. The DI. Together. I like them together, and I think we'll be able to do something. So phase relationship is definitely good enough there, and we'll get great results. Now we've decided we like both those elements of the bass, and we're going to keep both of them. We're going to group them. So just call it, you guessed it, bass. Now let's go to these acoustic guitars. We'll pan them left and right because they're called acoustic left and acoustic right. Some nice click bleed in there from the headphones. So what I just did there is I put a trim control on one of the two microphones, and then I pan them in the middle, and I flipped the phase of one of the channels. And I think this is just one performance. Now, the microphones might be slightly apart from each other. They could be a couple of inches. They might even just be an inch apart, but you can see there's some phase cancellation going on. So that's definitely one performance. So I'm not going to pan them left and right. I'm going to use either or. So I'm going to give it one more listen. Let's listen to the top one on its own. Quite a lot of body. So listen to the bottom one. All body and not much mid-range. Now listen together. It's not bad. We'll keep both of them. It says it's the same microphone. It says it's the CM402. I wonder if it's like a microphone that's been X-wide like that. I don't remember. And the reality is, like, this is like 6-7 months ago. I don't specifically remember this because I've recorded 100 sessions since. And this was at a studio where we were using the house engineer, who was phenomenal. And I know that they had some tricks they wanted to try. So in my estimation, they sound good together. They're labeled left and right, so maybe I can pan them a little bit away from each other, create a bit of width. I'm not into stereo miking an acoustic guitar. Might is a big word. I might do that if it was a single vocal on an acoustic guitar. I might want a more expansive, left and right acoustic sound. But usually I just go mono and then pan it slightly, put a bit of verb on it, and suddenly it's an acoustic guitar in a room. So it's an interesting thing for me. I'm going to keep it like this at the moment, so slightly panned away from each other as a stereo acoustic. Obviously group the two together. So thus far, we have this. What I'm trying to illustrate here is a lot of this prep is also part of getting into the song. It's okay if you're talking about, like I said, having an assistant and having everything ready for you just to mix. But the reality is like, as I'm doing this on my own, I'm learning about the song and I'm making some really informed decisions. I'm not delaying things. I'm organizing and listening. I'm listening in solo, yes, by all means, but I'm listening and I'm building a kind of a soundscape for myself. So you can understand the process here where we're organizing the files. So as you can see here, there is a stereo recording of the piano, and it is a pair of Lewitt 040s, very inexpensive microphones. Let's give it a quick listen. Sounds fantastic, but you also have a mono 414, which is actually in the sound hole. Now, I don't know this, but I do, obviously, because I recorded it. So somebody given this to you, you'd listen to that 414 and you think to yourself, very mid-rangey. Doesn't have the body of those little tiny mics, but it's a placement thing. And then there's a U87, which also is miking the frame of the piano. If I put the 414 and the U87 up together, there's a horrible phase cancellation going on. So I'm going to take, we're going to take the 414, for instance, and I am going to reverse the polarity on that, and we'll give it a listen. Now take that off and listen again. Put it on. Off. You can hear the low end comes right back in. So here we are, we're checking, we're finding phase issues. But both of those mics tend to be, they're metallic sounding. So I'm going to bring them down. Now I'm going to put in my main stereo piano back in and... Now, one of the issues here is because these mics are in completely different positions to each other, the 040s were in a in a pair over the piano, so they tend to sound nice and in phase and have some width, all that stuff. The other two are in a completely different area, so there's probably never going to be a perfect phase correlation. But in the right blend, they might work really well. And sometimes I'll take a mono piano like that and stick a reverb on it. So at the moment, I'm just doing phase correction by reversing the phase on one of the microphones, bringing down the blend, and then I'll just put these all together now and just call it, you guessed it, piano. So now I've created another organized set of mics on my piano. You see, for me, the setup, when you're on your own, is such an incredible opportunity to listen to things and get into them. We have a tambourine track here. It is always, when I've only got a mono tambourine, it's always my preference to pan it away from the hi-hat. Now, we know, because we've been listening to this song, that there's barely any hi-hat in it. There's actually some ride cymbal going through it and floor tom, so maybe we'll go the opposite way. So we'll pan it the opposite way. Throw in the drums and with the tambourine. Brought it down, happy. Simple as that. It's not a complicated thing to do. Okay, now we're going to go through and have a listen to all of these different elements here. Now, there are a ton of electronic elements here. So we can bring them all up together. So now we've organized them all together. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the piano and put that under the acoustics. So here's all of the programmed elements together. And I'm going to take that tambourine as well and stick it up under the drums. So now I've got all my percussion going on there. Now, that's not entirely true because, of course, we have the electronic drums, which is at the very top at the moment, which I probably will keep there, but we'll come back to that in a second. Let's have a listen to all of our programmed elements. It's cool, very synthetic sounds. This would be one of those situations where I'd probably wish that I had the MIDI so that I could maybe output some more authentic sounding string sounds. But I like what's going on. I'm probably going to have some fun with it, mess it up, distort it, do some crazy things. So for me at the moment, I'm probably just going to take the whole thing and just call it keys programmed. So now I've got like a group which is just program keys. Basic organization. With that stuff, with the key stuff, I'm going to spend more time like quote unquote mixing it. But at the moment, I've got a really quick blend. I turned up a couple of things, turned down a couple of things. Really, really super quickly. Put them all in a group and off you go. Let's go back up to the top just out of interest, just so we can hear these two programmed drum elements. Throw them into the kit. There's some conflicting stuff there. Let's have a listen to it with the vocal. I don't like that. I don't understand that. I don't have to make that decision at the moment, but that I suppose it's okay. I'm not in love with it, but it works. Sounds a bit messy, that, but we'll leave it in there. But it's just in the back of my mind that I might just, frankly, just mute that. But so far, you can see what we've been doing. We've been organizing things into groups so that I can make choices. If I just want to bring down the programming swiftly when I'm doing my first kind of sketch of the mix, that's what I will do. Okay, so we've got a vocal. What I'm looking for here is bad edits. So if we went back and we had, here's the original comp, it's pretty big sections. I just took whole big sections of the vocal and made a comp. Now, what else am I listening for? Stuff like that. Did you hear that? I will play that exact same section and have a listen. It's not quite locking. Bass, drums, piano, there's just moments that just aren't quite there. Now, it doesn't have to be gridded. We don't have to go through there and grid everything absolutely perfect, but it would be nice if it had that great performance element to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to bass and drums quickly. This is one of the issues here, and these are things that I make decisions about now. It's like, I'm not sure if I'm in love with that percussiveness. Because one of the problems is he's going bounce, bounce, and he's hitting the pickup with his hand. The good thing is that I can wipe out some of the bite of that by using the DI only for the low end. But I'm not sure if I love it. I'm tempted to just take it out for a minute. And have a listen, see what it feels like not having it in. Much prefer it. You see the difference where it came back in? It's distracting. So listen to the first part and then with and without it. So here's without the slapping on the pickup, and then it will come in and you'll hear the slapping again. That's just distracting. I think he's doing it to keep time. Part of what we do, we're editing. We haven't got into any real mixing except for level balancing, but we are editing out things that bother us. In this instance, it's the bass, but there's also timing issues. You got some flamming going on there on the drums, a tom playing early. I might get away with that. Very distracting, those slaps. Really glad we decided to get rid of those. Yeah, it's a tough one. So what I quite often do is I'll take the bass and I'll drag it up in the area around the kick. So I also have a visual reference of just like what the consistent groove is. Now, where I like the feel, you can hear him ahead, and you can also, with a visual cue, see how far ahead it is, so you can just drag it back a little bit. Now listen. Here, the bass is quite far behind, so I'm just going to drag it forward just a little bit. Too much? Now it just sounds rushed and like he's trying to play it too quickly. Very tempting to just do that, to be quite frank. There you go. So that whole section now. Now, this would be something I would do in the whole process of the song, just to make sure that the groove is there. It's not about editing every single note. It's about cleaning up slappy stuff like that. So when you compress and EQ things, especially if you want to make half of the bass sound like the amp super bright for some grit, all of that slapping on the pickup is going to be like, oh. I was doing a mix check with somebody the other day. We were listening to their full album. It was wonderful. But there was one song where the hi-hat was bleeding through the snare occasionally. So it was like, and it was just really super bright and taking my head off. And he admitted that he was using some kind of gate on the snare, but occasionally it wasn't triggering. So I encouraged him to just do this. Just go in there and draw out where the hi-hat bleed was. Throw in the piano in these areas and see how it sounds. pretty good. That one's always going to be weird because it's more of a drum issue. But if we get the piano and the bass to feel good around the kick, I think it's going to work really well. So I just brought the piano forward ever so slightly. Cool. So here we are. We're doing edits. Sometimes it's cleanup. Sometimes it's taking away buzzes and clicks. So let's take our acoustic guitar, pull it up there as well. Now here's a tough one because I'm hearing that headphone bleed. So because there's going to be gaps in the song, maybe I'll do this. Let's see how it feels. Again, you can do it volume automation, you can do mute, but I'm going to clean up in the middle and let's have a listen. Makes a difference. It does make a difference. And, you know, it's not rocket science. You can just literally go, well, here's the clear area. I'm going to pull out some of those sections. And you're not going to have that click that you're hearing in between. Again, really helping yourself out when you come to add a lot more compression and EQ. If you start brightening it up and compressing it more, that click, click, click is going to be like an ice pick through the head. So this is the time to do cleanup and prep for your mix. Again, a big mixer has somebody doing this all for them. I personally like doing it, not that it's not great to have Eric do it, because he does, but I like doing it because I get into the song. So for you on your own, this is a great way to listen to somebody's tracks, understand what's going on, and do cleanup and make sure everything works for you. Just opening up a session and just starting to mix is not going to do you good. Here, I'm already getting a balance and everything on my mix. I don't like that clap there, so I'm going to get rid of it. That one in that gap didn't make any sense to me. Okay, so here we have a keyboard solo part, which is printed very loud. So let's have a listen.
I wanna go everywhere. So many things to try so far at least. I wanna go everywhere, everywhere. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. I wanna go everywhere. So many things to try so far at least. I wanna go everywhere, everywhere. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. I wanna go everywhere. So many things.
Now that section was nice with all those breaks, but again, it was a little too sloppy for me. It's got all of those little thumpy bits on the bass I don't like. I'm going to pull this note forward because the kick just feels early, and it's basically because the bass is late. Now have a listen.
I wanna go.
So let's get rid of those little annoying little clicks that the bass player is doing. Again, like I said, they're there for him to keep time. Many guitar players do that. They want to play a funk part, for instance, and it might be, they'll go. And it can be nice. It can be quite nice, but what happens if you just want it to be more like a stab, and it's a catch-22. Sometimes it's a really nice thing to have those kind of, bass playing and guitar playing grace notes. But a lot of the time, we don't want that. We want those breaks. And I think that this is a good example. And also because, quite frankly, those high clicky sounds are taking me out of the zone.
I wanna go everywhere. So many things to try so far it is. I wanna go everywhere. Oh, I wanna go.
Yeah, the piano gets a little ahead. Sometimes it's okay. This is only slightly ahead, but we can just bring it back ever so slightly. And you can put the fades in as you go, or you can put the fades in afterwards. I have this kind of tendency to put them in afterwards, but that's just me. So here I just drag that back. So that bass note there felt a little late. It's interesting because it feels like the piano is slightly ahead and the bass is slightly late, but if we can still keep that relationship, but a little smoother, so bring the bass forward ever so slightly on those couple of hits and the piano ever so slightly back, we'll still get that urgency of the piano on the upbeat, but we'll still have the laziness of the bass, but it won't sound like it's badly flamming, which is what we're trying to avoid. Throw in the acoustic. Yeah, the acoustic gets a little too ahead, to say the least. So we'll drag those three back. Piano's a bit late there. And have a listen to this new acoustic, brought back ever so slightly. That's a little early. Let's see if I can do an edit here. Come up, there you go. Let's have a listen to the acoustic now. So, I nudged a few bass notes around, actually like 2 bass notes around, about 4 piano notes around, and a couple of acoustic guitars. Again, this is a session recorded in Berlin 7 months ago, 6 months ago. I'm not in the studio, so this is a mix situation. I'm just trying to tighten it and make it feel good. It's not me gridding everything. It's just doing maybe what I would have done, given more time in the studio. It's my job as a mixer to make it feel good. And so if there's edits that have to be done, I'll do them here. I think it's pretty subtle stuff, but it makes it feel better. Let's throw in the strings. So the thing to watch for is now like edits. As we can see there, this is a one performance, and I already cleaned up. So you can see here, that's a completely cleaned up performance. You might get something that's super, super chopped up. And one of the issues is when you get something that's very chopped up is they may not have put any fades in. And so you can put your own fades in, but be careful, because if they've done a bad edit, for instance, and I can show you, we'll invent a bad edit to illustrate. Let's take this part of the kick and move it back. I've seen this before many times. So somebody has edited the kick drum so there's a double hit, and you get to hear this. How many times have you heard that? I hear it a lot in bad edits. And the problem is that it might happen twice in a drum take. So what you've got to do is you've got to go in there. Quite often you've got to copy and paste from other areas, or hopefully you can solve it. Like in this issue, if this was consolidated, I would probably take this chunk, edit it out, paste it back over, and then, clean it up and put fades in, off you go. But there might be situations where you can't do that. There might not be enough to like push it over and then move the either sides and get a nice clean edit. So that's where you're in a situation where maybe you have to find that same beat a couple of bars later with the same cymbal bleed in it. That can be difficult, finding the same cymbal bleed and bringing it in. You don't want to, unless you're really forced to, you don't want to edit outside a group in drums. You want to stay in group the whole time. So, but those are the kind of things that this is the stage to be finding those kind of things. The double hits, the bad edits. It happens in vocals. You might go, I don't know. And you get those double Ds with a bad edit. This is the time where it's okay to listen in solo and find those issues. So for me, this is where I'd leave off. Now, this where maybe a template, if you have one, would come in and you'd start bringing in buses and things like that. That really is the next stage, because everybody does everything differently. We can talk about creating templates in another video, and I'm sure as heck will. I will do a template creation, and I will let that be a download you can get. So hopefully this all helped. Please leave a whole bunch of comments and questions below. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll speak to you all again very, very soon.